Hello, guys. David Vose here again. It's a beautiful day. Sun is shining. It's really warm. Everything's going well for me. I hope everything is going well for you guys, wherever you are. Well, today I'm going to continue on where we left off yesterday. And, you know, I believe that what we said yesterday in that 1 hour and 13-minute video was pretty convincing by itself. I think there's only one flaw in the whole thing. If the Book of Mormon's true, and I know that it is, and I've had many confirmations on top of the fact that I know that it is. The words, the Nuha Indians being the Nephites, the people speaking a Hebrew Egyptian type of language, and on, these different things. But the only flaw is the geography doesn't always seem to fit. Well, that's because people didn't know if it was in Florida or if it was in Central America or it was in Heartland or where. Because there's a little confusing things going on here. I don't think it could be confusing at all if the land that it is being written about was in the shape that it says that it is in the Book of Mormon. So I would say that the only thing that's a little confusing to me is that the land between the border of Mexico and the United States, which everything about what I said yesterday fits perfectly. A land desolation, a desert land would be Mexico. A land bountiful would be America, or, the United States. And we know that Joseph Smith got the plates in New York. And we know that they had many battles and traveled many, Moroni traveled 40 years wandering around from the last point where they had their battle and the Nephites were practically, they were all defeated. There's a few people Mormon watched the battle and they got defeated. It was 40 years later that Moroni is wandering around and finally goes to New York and drops him off there. So just various things, basically what we said yesterday proves the whole thing, except the only odd thing out here, in my opinion, is the narrow strip of land is only supposed to be, in the Book of Mormon, it says that it's a day and a half for a Nephite to pass across. Now, it doesn't say whether that means that by means of walking or riding horses, but they did have horses, so we could easily understand that to mean quite a ways, because if you have a horse, you could probably travel 100 miles in a day, maybe, I don't know, maybe more. That would mean maybe 150 miles total. If you are traveling the whole day and a half, you could go 150 miles or more. I don't know. I don't know if you could really go it's 450 miles from the Pacific to the Gulf, up where the United States border with Mexico is. 450 miles through rugged terrain. I doubt whether you could do that on horseback in a day and a half. I really do. I'm not an expert on how far you can ride horses, but I don't think it's more than maybe 30, 40 miles. And maybe if you're really going, you could go 50 miles. So a day and a half would be only like 75 miles. But I could conceive of maybe 150 miles, which is what it is from the Gulf of Mexico and to the Atlantic there on Florida. Florida's about 150 miles wide. Of course, that narrow strip of land that the Book of Mormon says you could cross, a Nephite could cross in a day and a half, I assume by just walking, that was written by Alma, which was a different time period before that. And he might have been in a different area all the way down to where it is a narrow strip of land by Guatemala or Central America. And the other area where it's still calling it a narrow strip of land is the northern area, and it's much larger there. It's not actually a 3-day journey, just somewhat more narrow than the United States proper. But even if that could technically be true, it still doesn't satisfy or really explain why someone would write that was a narrow strip of land when it's 450 miles across from the Gulf to the Pacific Ocean at the border of the United States and Mexico, which was the border of desolation and bountiful. But then again, from one end of Florida to the other, if you were going to take it as Florida, that's 150 miles. Unless you want to take one of these little, the passage between Michigan and Wisconsin or something, and say that the land bountiful is up in Canada. But, and there's some slight, advantages to that theory, but it doesn't fit all the pieces. The things that we know about Zelf being from the Rocky Mountains to New York, and Moroni dedicating a temple in St. George, Utah, and the Gadianton robbers being in St. George in that area in Utah, and Joseph Smith's prophecy pointing his finger at the snowflake, and many, many other things. And if you took the area around Florida, that's not even big enough area to do all of these, from 600 BC to 400 AD, like 1,000 years. Now, people can travel a long ways in 1,000 years, and there were various lands. You can't have the Lamanites who hate the Nephites and their two lands being 100 miles apart. You know what I mean? They had to have been separated, and then, very well could have been separated by hundreds and hundreds of miles. And these wars were not just saying that they had a battle, but that they had been run out and they were chased hundreds of miles. And when you have a war and you've got, let's say, 30,000 armies or more, and you're fighting another army that probably has 30,000 or more, you may lose a battle in one spot, but if you're losing, you retreat, and you're going to go another 100 miles up through the mountains and get away. You're going to retreat. And then, if there looks like there's no way you're going to win, you may pack up and get all your family and go, another 10 miles? They'll come and get you. You got to go far, far away to go to a place where they don't want to pursue you because they don't need that land. That's not their land. So it makes more sense that these battles were fought over hundreds and hundreds of miles of land. But again, the only problem with what I said yesterday is that it's 450 miles from the border of Mexico, from the Gulf of Mexico all the way over to the Pacific Ocean. There's like 450 miles. And I don't think that that's a day and a half journey at all, unless they had rockets. But it is, theoretically a narrower little piece of land, Mexico. And as I said yesterday, looking at the altitude, or the elevation of the Salton Sea and those other seas that go in a series all the way up to California, and it's lowland all the way up through Sacramento. And it just makes sense that there could have been water there, but we don't know when, right? Well, let me show you this. And I've spent a lot of time talking about this already in this video, because I do believe this is a very important thing. That we need to know not only about the Book of Mormon, and I think maybe this is the one, possibly the one thing that's confused people, because they didn't know the actual geography of the land of Mexico and the United States at the time this book was being written, which was 200, 300 AD, right? So that's like 1700 years ago. We didn't have cameras, and there weren't any American newspapers operating, and cardiographers there might have been, but will you believe the seafaring cardiographers? Will you believe the great explorers who got on boats and eyewitness accounts tell you what they saw at that time? Well, we don't have any records at the time that the Nephites were there, but we do have a lot of records from about 1500, I think even before that, but around 1500 AD until 1776, coincidentally. But there's quite a few people that explored and sailed there and made maps, and they're not just one or two maps. You get hundreds of maps, many of which were written, not just copied, from people who saw it with their own eyes. And they're kind of fair in this article here on Wikipedia, the island of California. They're kind of fair with this, but I wonder just how much they're skewing you when you're reading it to think, well, maybe it's not true. Even with all the evidence that they will admit, but then they kind of give you the idea, well, it's probably not true. We proved it's not true. But I'll have you keep in mind that the only proof that California wasn't an island is that later on in 1700 and something, somebody said that it was a peninsula, the Baja California Peninsula, and it didn't go all the way up into California, they claimed. But this was like 1700 or something. But that wasn't even confirmed. That's just another speculation that some Catholic friar from somewhere in Baja California and walked up there and said, nah, it's a peninsula. But that's it. That's all we've got. But then it was, they say, proven by 76 or something like this. Some other people went there and they proved that it was a peninsula. But remember, if you've got people that see something with their own eyes and you say, well, that's proof, then you have to believe the people that was before who with their own eyes said it was an island. Especially when many witnesses said it, like more than 3. And we're supposed to take the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, if there's a contradiction, then what are we going to do? Well, there's not a contradiction, because the people who confirmed it was a peninsula did so in 1700 and something. Way long after. The people who said it was an island was back in 1500s, 1600s, and before. So, let me just read you what this says. The island of California refers to a long-held global misconception. Long-held global misconception. Boy, that's rare, isn't it? If we don't like what the explorers and the map makers and the ship sailors saw with their own eyes and their eyewitness accounts, then we'll just say, oh, it was a misconception. Those idiots didn't know what they were looking at. This is dating from the 16th century that the California region was not part of mainland North America. Was not part of North America. But rather a large island separated from the continent by a strait now known as the Gulf of California. Now, here, that's a map of California 1650 by Johannes Vingboons. Restored the compass rose in the center of the map, marks the approximate location of the modern United States-Mexico border south of San Diego. But then here's another map, the island of California on a 1650 map. Why would somebody make a map like that if it's not true? Why would 2 people make maps like that? Now, if you look at this map, this is a present map, and you can literally see that it would take about, if the ocean rose an inch, it would go all the way up in there to California. So it's certainly not any far-fetched idea. One of the most famous cartographic errors in history. It was propagated on many maps during the 17th and 18th centuries, despite contradictory evidence from various explorers. Yeah, after, and they will admit here that there was a big flood. So that it was, sometimes there was no water there, perhaps in some places, and other times it would flood and there would be water. They show you proof of that. So it seems to me that the further you go back, it was underwater. But in the 1600s, maybe it was going from dry to wet, depending on the year. And an El Nino season or something like this. Because you have to trust people's eyes. I trust the individual witness who said, yeah, I saw it and it was an island. I don't think you can mistake that. They got big boats. It's not like they were just walking with a, backpack and they couldn't see anything. They just, made it up. But no, these guys had crews and they investigated and they sailed in through these inlets and these bays, and they couldn't have made that big a mistake and said, oh, the whole thing's an island. Now, if one, maybe two had said that, you might believe it. But we're going to show the evidence is overwhelming that California was, in 1600, possibly an island. What was it in the days of Nephi? I think it was even more water. And I believe that probably the coast of, well, if you look at the Gulf of California, it comes up to, what is it, Mexicali? Well, go on up into Arizona, you go to Blythe. A little further, you go to Havasu City. This is all along the Colorado. Remember what I said about the Colorado? The land antum means where the water is held back. What water? I bet it's the water in the Gulf of California that is being fed by the Colorado. And if you go up the Colorado, you come to this great big river. It gets bigger and bigger, this gorge. I wonder if that's not the water that's being held back by some elevations or rocks or it doesn't even necessarily mean that the water couldn't get to the California Gulf, but that it was just flowing in a river and kind of being held back in all this, this tremendous tons of water coming down the river. It's kind of like being held back by this waterfalls and stuff. If you've seen Havasu City, it's beautiful. But somewhere then along the Colorado River, we know that the water ebbs and flows. It rises, it goes further up, and sometimes it comes further down. But let's find some serious evidence for the fact that maybe the land, and remember, if there was a rise in the water in the Gulf of California, there might have also been water in the Gulf that would be rising on the other side, and the whole geography of Mexico would be pushed in quite a ways, and perhaps it would be only maybe 150 miles across the mountain range there, and everything else was underwater or something. But let's take a look at this. It says, and this is so interesting, the legend was initially infused with the idea that California was a terrestrial paradise, like the Garden of Eden or Atlantis. Huh? Really? I mean, we can't make this up. This mapping error was not, it was an error though, of course. It wasn't really a paradise. They just thought it was, these stupid idiots. The mapping error was not a one-off event. From the mid-1500s to the late 1700s, great controversy surrounded the geography of California. Well, I think they're lying a little bit. I think there was a little controversy because there might have been one guy that said, I didn't see it. Right? Some goon on his ship or whatever didn't see it. So they say, hey, I didn't see it. But that wasn't enough to convince all the other cartographers around the world. The explorers come back and say, yeah, it's there. And they made the maps. All the maps had California as an island. But there was a great controversy because of this one guy they're going to tell you. For instance, a Spanish map from 1548 depicts California as a peninsula. Okay. While a 1622 Dutch map depicts California as an island. Oh, well, there you go. Somebody's lying, right? Wait a minute. A 1626 Portuguese map depicts the land as a peninsula, while a 1630 British map depicts it as an island. A French map from 1682 only shows the tip of the Baha'i Peninsula. There are slightly over 1,000 maps in Stanford's Glenn McLaughlin collection of California as an island, the largest collection of such maps in the world. 1,000 maps that say it was an island. The first known mention of the legend of the island of California was in 1510. Romance novel Las Sergas de Esplandian by Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo, the sequel to Montalvo's more famous tales of Amadis de Gaula, Father Esplandian. He described the island in this passage. Know that on the right hand of the Indies, there is an island called California, very close to the side of the terrestrial paradise. Now, notice he says the side of the terrestrial earthly paradise, not the heavenly paradise, but the Garden of Eden. And it is peopled by black women. This is so beautiful, without any man living with them. For they live in the manner of the Amazons. Oh, this is getting intriguing. Oh, man, I would have loved to have gone to that island. It is thought that because of the widespread popularity of Las Sergas de Esplandian at the time of the European exploration of California, that it is reasonable that the book inspired the naming of California. So, you see, the whole idea of California, the name of it itself, comes from this legend that it was an island with big, strong Amazonian women. The book's description is also thought to have prompted early explorers to misidentify the Baja California Peninsula as the island in these legends. Legends, plural. There were many. Okay, it was something everybody told because people went there and they saw it. In 1533, Fortune Ximenez, a mutineer on an exploring expedition sent by Hernan Cortez, discovered the southern portion of Baja California, around present-day La Paz. He was killed by natives, but this man returned to New Spain and reported on their find. In 1535, Cortez arrived in the bay there and named the area Santa Cruz. He attempted to start a colony, but abandoned his efforts after several years due to logistical problems. Cortez's limited information on southern Baja California apparently led to the naming of the region after the legendary California and to an initial but short-lived assumption that it was a large island. Oh, it was just an assumption. Another darn liar. Okay, Mr. Cortez. Oh, buddy, he was a liar. Except when we want to believe something he said, then he was, of course, a truth-teller. But in 1539, Cortez sent the navigator Francisco de Ulloa northward along the Gulf and Mexico coasts of Baja California. Ulloa reached the mouth of the Colorado River at the head of the Gulf, which seemed to prove that the region was a peninsula rather than an island. It seemed to prove that. Ulloa was quoted as having described the land he saw on his expedition as high and bare, of wretched aspect, without any verdure. An expedition under Hernando de Alarcon ascended the lower Colorado River, confirmed Ulloa's finding. Maps published subsequently in Europe during the 16th century included these by Gerardus Mercator and Abraham Ortelius correctly showed Baja California as a peninsula. Okay, so they disprove all these thousands of people and these thousands of maps because there's one guy that seemed to prove, because of his observations, lone man, right? And, by the way, there was another guy that walked down the Colorado River from above hiking, I guess, and he said, nope, it's not an island. So this proves, see, they're only giving you the proof that it's not an island from a couple of yahoos. But the thousands of people that says it was an island, they're just saying, oh yeah, there was another 1,000 or so over here that thought it was an island. But, it had to be a misconception. We're going to take Cortez's side of the story. Rather than many cartographers independently making the same mistake, it is thought that maps of California as an island spread due to copying in the early 1600s. Okay, but they didn't copy just one map over and over again. There were many different maps that were given to them this shape by the actual people that sailed there. So this is not, they're wording this wrong, but if you look at the way they're wording it, they're not lying too much, but they're just spinning it a little bit. Interestingly, the first maps depicting California as an island originated after a series of correct maps. Carmelite Friar Antonio de la Ascensión, a priest at the top of the Spanish church, was the first known person to depict California as an island in 1603. On the return voyage to Acapulco, Mexico, Friar Antonio's ship was overtaken by Dutch pirates who found and confiscated a map drawn by him that depicted California as an island, effectively leaking state secret information. Spain was not in the habit of willingly sharing information about their expeditions. In fact, maps produced by Sebastian Vizcaino, the leader of the expedition that brought Fray Antonio de la Ascensión to California, were not published until 1802, 200 years after the expedition occurred. Shortly after, the map was confiscated from Friar Antonio's ship. Dutch maps were published depicting California as an island. At the bottom left corner of a British map from 1630, drawn by Henry Briggs, is scribbled California, sometimes supposed to be a part of the western continent, but since by a Spanish chart taken from Hollanders, it is found to be a goodly island. Okay, now put the brakes on here. So again, there was some confusion, and so they sent some guy over there to make certain. Henry Briggs, he said, California is sometimes supposed to be part of the western continent, but since by Spanish chart taken from Hollanders, it is found to be a goodly island. So, okay, that's not just like, oh, he happened to see it and he wrote it down. But no, he went there to investigate to see if it was an island, and he said it was. This is why the Dutch maps were all depicting California as an island, because that's where Holland is. So, the Dutch were reputable cartographers. It is thought that the word of California as an island began to spread as the majority of maps depicting California as an island were published after 1622. Throughout the 1600s, the Dutch, Japanese, French, Germans, British, and more all drew California as an island. Okay, did you see that? Throughout the 1600s, the Dutch, the Japanese, the French, the Germans, the British, and more all drew California as an island. Another contributing factor may have been the second voyage of Juan de Fuca in 1592. De Fuca claimed to have explored the western coast. He claimed of North America and to have found a large opening that possibly connected to the Atlantic Ocean, the legendary Northwest Passage. Finding a Northwest Passage was something that motivated many of the explorers coming to the California coast at the time, as it would be extremely profitable for Europe if a northern trade route to Asia could be found. In fact, explorers like Sebastian Vizcaino were operating under orders to sail north until they found the Northwest Passage, and only to turn around if the coast veered northwest, which would imply that there was no waterway and the land was actually connected to Asia. De Fuca's claims remains controversial because there is only one surviving written account of it found. His account, as related to the Englishman Michael Locke, nevertheless This account claims De Fuca found a large strait with a large island at its mouth at around 47 degrees north latitude. The Strait of Juan de Fuca is in fact at around 48 degrees north, as in the southern tip of the large island now called Vancouver Island, while the northern reach of the Gulf of California terminates much further south at about 31 north. It is possible that explorers and map makers in the 17th century would have confused the two, if in fact they were aware of De Fuca's voyage. Well, they probably was confused, is what they're saying. We're not going to listen to these eyewitnesses. And in any case, further exploration was inevitable. Indeed, the famed British explorer James Cook narrowly missed the Strait of Juan de Fuca in March of 1778. Almost 200 years later, Cook even named Cape Flattery at the northwest tip of the modern Washington state, which is at the mouth of the strait, and stopped in Nootka Sound, just off the west coast of Vancouver Island, at about 49 degrees north. His account states, "We saw nothing like the Strait of Juan de Fuca." I don't know why they put that in parentheses. Is it not there in the text? I don't know. Nor is there at least any probability that ever any such thing existed. However, I find it odd that there's no, the word Strait of Juan de Fuca is in parentheses. So if you just read it without that, "we saw nothing like," nor is there the least probability that ever any such thing existed. I don't know what such thing never existed, because it looks like they added that, but I don't know what's going on there. However, Cook described some bad weather in his account around this time, and did continue on to map most of the outer Pacific coastline of North America from the modern-day Northern California to the Bering Strait in Alaska on the same voyage. A key role in changing ideas about California seems to have been played by an overland expedition led by the founding governor of Santa Fe de Nueva Mexico, Juan de Onate. The expedition descended the Colorado River in 1604 and 1605, and its participants believed that they saw the Gulf of California, continuing off, they believed this, to the northwest, presumably behind the Sierra de los Cucapa, into the Laguna Salada Basin and Lake Cahuilla, but was more likely due to the California superflood in 1605. Okay, so in 1605, they're telling you flat out, point blank, looking you straight dead in your eyes, without even blinking, that yes, there were floods in those days. We don't have them now, but there were floods in those days that did flood, look at this, in which the flooded Central and Indio Valley basins did essentially appear to extend the peninsula hundreds of miles northward. There you go. There's your proof. There's your sign. There it is. This is absolute proof now by many eyewitnesses and a couple of people who said, well, it looked like a peninsula, not an island. There's your reason why. There's why there's any controversy. Because back in 1600, there were floods. We don't know how often or whatever, but floods did occur where they extended the Gulf of California up hundreds of miles. That would be all the way to California. And that is proof. And that's in 1600. We don't know then. It would seem likely then that when you go all the way back to the days of the Nephites in Mexico, 600 BC, and then up to about the time of Christ in 200 years AD, which was 1800 years ago, it seems very likely that that was all underwater, all the way through California, and perhaps a lot of the land where we see seashells all the way through Nevada might have been underwater. How do we know? If they can geologically prove that it was millions of years ago when that was underwater, we know that the water's dropping for whatever reason, because the Great Salt Lake keeps losing water to this day. It used to be a big, huge thing called the Bonneville sea or lake. It was big. It was way, some say it covered most of Utah or into Idaho and stuff. This whole area was all underwater. And I have no doubt that the entire Nevada, most of Arizona and Utah and parts of Idaho and the whole area was underwater at some time. And we can see how quickly the water's been going down in just the last 100 years or so. So back in 400 AD, I suspect most of the area there in Nevada, Utah, and Idaho and stuff was underwater. Phoenix was right on the shore, probably. And so I know I can hear somebody saying, well, they've proven, Dave, that you're wrong. I mean, they've got science, and they know, and it was like millions of years when that was underwater. Then, if that's true, then why don't they just geologically prove whether or not California was underwater? Or whether it wasn't? They wouldn't have to argue about this anymore. Well, they can't. They're still going by eyewitness testimony. They don't have a way to know what the shape of the earth was 1,000 years ago, friends. It's just like them telling you that they can see galaxies and they can see the 4 spiraling arms in our galaxy when we're in the galaxy. And it's 2,000 light years across, and there's no way they could have ever taken a picture, and there's no way you can know the shape or the number of trees and their locations and elevations in a forest when you're standing in the middle of a forest that's hundreds of miles and you can't see and map it from within it. You've got to get back and look at it. We don't know if there are galaxies. They're just lying. And so when they say, oh, well, we know that it was a glacier that came through and made the Grand Canyon, or some will say, no, it was erosion, or no, it's a split in the earth because, right, it's a plate that split because there was an earthquake. Or they got all, I mean, you could come up with any theory you want. Some people think that these, like Devil's Tower in, South Dakota? Or is it in Wyoming? I think it's in the border of South Dakota and Wyoming there. I think it's in Wyoming. I went there. I don't remember. But some people think that's an ancient petrified tree. Okay, well, I don't agree. But that doesn't stop them from believing it. I think it's a volcanic rock that sort of oozed out the hard core of a shaft or a volcanic shaft. And the outer part of that volcanic shaft was dirt, and it washed away and eroded, and all we've got is this little kind of a trunk. And we don't know what it was. We find different kinds of rock, and people today, scientists say this is sedimentary, they have their different theories, and many of their theories may be very, very true. But I'm telling you, they cannot tell you whether or not California was underwater. How could they tell you how much water was in the Gulf? I think the narrow strip of land in 400 AD was probably from about Havasu City or Las Vegas area or something. And from there across the Rocky Mountain area, maybe it was 100 miles, is this ridge of rocks that is at the head of the Colorado River. That's where it flowed in. And it probably flowed down into that bay that went all the way up into California, and that was an island. And that was probably a well deep underwater, maybe even up into Nevada and stuff. We just really don't know. But reports from Oneti's expedition reached Antonio de la Ascensión, a Carmelite friar who had participated in Sebastian Vizcaino's explorations of the west coast of California in 1602-1603. Ascensión was a tireless propagandist in favor of Spanish settlement in California, and his latter writings referred to the region as an island. As older maps confirm, Spanish authorities and local residents were all aware where the actual northern terminus of the Gulf of California lay, but by extending the coastline north past Cape Mendocino and eventually even to Puget Sound, Francis Drake's claim of Nova Albion for England in 1579 could be invalidated by the priority of Cortez's claim in 1533. Now, let me show you where these places actually are. Gulf of California went all the way up past Cape Mendocino. Where's that? Cape Mendocino, meaning Cape of Mendoza, is located approximately 200 miles, 320 kilometers, north of San Francisco. San Francisco. Yeah. I was born in Fresno, well, in the hospital in Fresno, California, but we lived at the base of Mount Whitney, which is 14,000 foot highest mountain in the continental United States, and up by Auberry and Lake Shaver Lake, and up in there in a little cabin that I guess you could stick your hand through the walls because, we had wood heat and Dad was a trapper. But anyway, it's located on the Lost Coast, entirely within Humboldt County, California. Now, where's Puget Sound? It is on the northwestern coast of the United States, state of Washington. It is a complex estuarine system of interconnected marine waterways and basins. A part of the Salish Sea, Puget Sound has one major and two major connections to the Strait of Juan de Fuca. But anyway, I'm not going to read the whole thing. There really isn't any proof. And as I said, in what we've said today and what we've read, I think it proves beyond a doubt that the little oddity that we had yesterday about the narrow strip of land is solved. Anyway, I didn't get what I wanted to say today, so we're going to obviously do a third one. I covered this whole aspect today because that's really the only problem that we had in defining where all these places and locations are. Now that we know that this is true, California used to be islands or way underwater, maybe even up in Nevada, then we can certainly see that the narrow strip of land is Mexico. But that would mean that the coast would probably be somewhere above Phoenix or something. And that's very close to Snowflake, Arizona, where Joseph Smith pointed when he said that's where they had their battle, and that would be near the location of this hill of Shem. I'm going to go ahead and go. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. May the Lord bless you and prosper you. Have a good one.